Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of The Curse, Episode 4, Under the Big Tree. I'm going to break my review up into two parts this time. We'll start with everything going on with Dougie, and then we'll finish off with everything going on with Asher and Whitney. Now, we get this long sequence in the beginning of the episode with Dougie, and he wakes up in his car, and there is a phone call he's getting from the HGTV executive. So all the theories about there not actually being a show go out the window here. There is a show. He wasn't lying about that. But they're picking up the show here. This is great news for Dougie, and we'll see for Asher and Whitney later on. But on his hand, he has written Under the Big Tree. So he doesn't have his car keys on him. He's basically stranded out here. And the big reveal in this moment is that there's two other cars there. So you're trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And I love when he goes to the second tree here when he's looking under different trees. He says, second time's a charm. That's what they say, right? Clearly not what they say. And he pulls up a rock at one point and there's a scorpion under it. And usually a scorpion appears to you in symbolism. It means it's time to step away from poisonous people and situations. This could say a lot of things here about Dougie's current situation, that maybe this is bad news for Dougie. The show got picked up because he's staying with people like Asher and Whitney and doing this project, but we'll see. Now, the big mystery of this episode is he finds a piece of a vase under this big tree and he keeps it, and we'll see later on in the episode him looking at it, but there's really no clue of what the hell this thing is and what it means to him. But I do think it might connect to his original story, what would happen with his wife, and that he feels he has been cursed, which we'll get to. But we also see to himself thinks he's a genius because it's not only under the big tree all the keys, but it's the little tree that it's under that's under the big tree. And he finds the keys to all the cars and notes with addresses and names of who these people are and where these cars belong to. Everything will be explained in a later scene when he goes to one of the car owners, Calvin, and his mom is there, and it's a kid. And the kid says that Dougie went outside the school and lectured us about how his wife died drunk driving. But the real story that happened here is that he found these kids outside of a liquor store and only brought them beer if they gave him their car keys. He wanted to lecture basically and teach them a lesson doing this. And the kid's like, well, I'm a minor. You bought us beer and stole my car. But this is where Dougie goes back at him and says, you don't want a criminal record or you're going to end up a janitor. And he wants a thank you for this. But you're seeing about Dougie how he really is a big kid in this episode and how he can't let go of the past and being that age, and also how much he really does think about this drunk driving incident that happened with his wife and the guilt he's feeling by actually going out of his way and preventing teens from drunk driving. Now, later in the episode, I want to go to the second half of this scene that's very important with Dougie and Asher in the hotel room. And he's looking at footage again of Nala cursing Asher. And he's pointing out that right after the curse, there's this audio static. So there's some people who still have a theory that Dougie is leaning into this maybe to get more emotion out of Asher, and that he wants him to really believe that there's a curse and get more footage out of that. But I don't think it's going that way at this point. I think Dougie actually believes that he was cursed and that him being cursed is somehow connecting to Asher getting cursed by this girl Nala. But he's saying there's no other way he can explain what happened with his wife. I love while he's saying this though, there's a Domino's pizza box behind him, so that's actually a callback to him wanting to get Domino's with them the last episode. But I do think this all connects to a line that Abshir actually says to Asher in this episode, where he says, you put idea in someone's head, it can become very real. So somewhere I believe Dougie was believing that he was cursed, trying to make him feel better about what he actually caused with his wife's death. And that can be something that's more of a theme in this show, and a message about people believing something can make it actually real and true in their heads. It was also interesting when Dougie was doing laps in the pool. Towards the end of this episode, he's just so frustrated that a family comes in when he's trying to just have the pool to himself. And there's just very creepy music playing when he's looking at this vase piece. So there's more to this mystery with Dougie. He's a very fascinating character, and there's a mysterious story going on of exactly what happened in the past with his wife that we don't know all the pieces, and something he probably did after that tragedy happened in his trauma of it, and how it will eventually connect to Asher and Whitney more and more in the curse aspect. But there is that very immature side highlighted here of Dougie, and especially in that scene in the pool. Now let's go on to everything going on with Asher and Whitney in this episode. So they're very excited. They got this call from an HGTV executive. The show has been picked up. Asher puts the cowboy hat on. You gotta love Nathan Fielder in a cowboy hat. One of those guys, you see him visually like that and you can't stop laughing, and he's doing this air guitar. What's interesting though is the network executive asks that maybe they don't focus as much on the people who lived in the homes before. She's like, show that you're still helping them without pointing out that they have been displaced by your development or developments in general. So obviously this is going to strike Whitney the wrong way. She's going to be worried about this. And she actually makes a good point here, saying to Asher, hey, wait, but didn't the people in the focus group respond to that stuff and like that stuff? This just shows you how network executives will just miss things like that. Yeah, maybe you should listen to what the focus group was saying there. They did like that, but they're not worried about that. They're worried about not pointing out things that might, in the end, make them look kind of bad. But you see, Whitney's trying to not feel upset about this by spinning it. Oh, maybe there will be good out of this, that we can really focus on the homes now and the environmental aspect. And she's like, but the community will always be a part of it. That's never going to change, ever. That kind of line is setting up what the rest of the season is going to be about, because yes, it's going to change. That whole philosophy that they want to have the community be a big part of that is just going to blow up in Whitney's face. You're already seeing that happen here in this episode with this complication in her happy idea of where this would all go with a character like Vic, which we're going to get to. Now, Emma Stone does maybe my favorite piece of acting here when she's thinking deep down about the problem, again, what the focus group said, that Asher, her husband, is not funny on camera. And I do believe deep down she thinks he's not funny in real life. She can tell herself that, but he really isn't a funny person. We see how many times he bombs to people in real life, not even just on camera. So she brings up him going to a corporate comedy class. So when I heard this, I was like, oh my God, please have Nathan Fielder in a corporate comedy class. I hope we get that payoff and that they deliver on that. And they do, which we're going to get to. But you knew at that moment when you heard that there was going to be a great scene coming. And I love Asher's response to this and says to her, are you going to take the classes too? But it's funny when you're watching this, the irony of all this is that Whitney's actually would be a good producer because she's listening to the focus group in all aspects. And you're seeing that she's the only one actually taking those things seriously. So I love the doorbell rings. They think this might be a gift from the network, but it's a reality check here, and that their neighbor Maria from 2 blocks over shows this signage that Victor is putting up. And it's accusatory is the issue, right? That he's accusing people in the neighborhood that they're stealing his packages. What makes this more frustrating is that he has a camera right in front of his door. So there is a better way to approach this in general. And you see Maria says to Whitney, you promised us the people you brought in the community would be in harmony with the community. So this is going to set Whitney off because Vic is this character that is like this bomb into her dream plan of how this was all gonna go, and it's messing things up. He's like the problem child for Whitney. What I love is when Whitney is reacting this upset and she wants to go talk to Vic, that Asher is more concerned about losing the discount of an augmented reality guy that's supposed to be really good, and they would get a great discount because they would get this from Vic. So he's like, well, don't push Vic too much. Now, what I also thought was interesting is Whitney goes to drive in her car to see Vic, but she stops herself, and there's a big point made of this because she wants to walk and be a person of the people. She's literally waving to the neighbors. She says hi to a dog she recognizes. And while this is going on, just Asher triple checking his frozen meal nows to make sure they're not tampered with by someone he believes might be Nala. And when you watch this again, you really catch a lot more visually. Like when Whitney first gets to Vic's, the first thing she notices the induction stove at the recyclables and that the camera in front of the door. So her seeing these two things, what's great about Emma Stone, her facial acting, right? That she pauses to control her rage. And this is a great decision by the director to show that in the reflection of the house itself. And she has to keep on the smile without completely losing it on Vic, who is literally messing everything up for her. And he opens the door. He's got a Seinfeld shirt on. I love when she tells Vic that the show got picked up to series. He quickly says, you don't need me for anything else, do you? Like, does not want to ever be on the show again. And she learns that he swapped the induction stove for a gas one, which no longer makes this a passive home. It's also dangerous. So he's like, yeah, I'm venting the air. He's definitely not. So that's going to come back and be a problem later. But he also says he hasn't called the police yet either, but he says in a way that that's definitely definitely something he might do. And she's like, can you please be careful with your language? He looked at as accusatory, but he does not care at all. So he's just going to be an issue for everything Whitney wants to be in this perfect idea of how our show's going to go, how this neighborhood's going to go. This is just life on life's terms, and she's facing that. So she walks away furious, and I love she takes a pic of the stove on her way out. And you just knew when Whitney told Asher that the stove was in perfect condition outside, he was going to go grab it. I mean, this is a man who paused at this ATM fee early on. Now, Asher goes to bring food to Ebshir's family, but he's really there to do a mold test. Asher notices they like pasta, and the dad says, well, it's actually Nala who does. And then he goes, oh, what's your favorite type? And she says spaghetti. And he's like, do you like penne? He's saying that because what that original dish he thinks she tampered with was chicken penne. And she's like, that's macaroni. The way they look at each other after she says that, I was just dead. And it's such cringe moment here when he's talking to Nala's sister. Remember, Nala's sister really has bad vibes from him and doesn't want him in the house. And he's like, you can bring in this petri dish and say, Uncle Asher helped you make it. Like, what? But he's bringing up the tiny curse videos, and the dad is overhearing this. And also, he's doing an impression of him as like this old guy. And it's, again, I'm talking about, he's always bombing. So she's like, that's not funny. But Abshir takes him aside. He's like, can I show you something? And he's like, please just stop talking about the curses. And he's like, where I'm from, we don't play with that. And he says, do you mind if I ask you where you're from? And he says, Minnesota. I was laughing so hard at that. And he says that great line where he's like, you put idea in someone's head, it can become very real. Again, I think this is a moment in the show to actually tell you a big message in this show. But I love the payoff here in this scene because Asher goes, oh, you wanted me to show me something in here. And it's like, oh my God, Asher. Like, that's just one of those brain dead moments of Asher saying something like that. Now, another interesting moment they have is Whitney notices Fernando outside of the store is still carrying a gun in the middle of the day. And she has her assistant tell him it's not necessary as she watches her do that and does like a fake working. Now, this is the worst way to go about something like this, especially when you're supposed to be the leader here, and it dehumanizes people, right? Because you're not going in the approach where you just face them face to face and say this. This is already becoming corporate and distant in a way to someone like Fernando, who she was supposed to be bonding with and helping. And the assistant does it so easily, and she's like, I told him not to bring the gun anymore, and he said okay. So, you know, she's coming off as scared to him and distant, even though she's right there. Now, the Nathan for You sequence of this episode is when Asher is going to grab the stove, and he is with this man, Freckle, and Asher doesn't want to be seen on camera, and Freckle's like, well, it's just trash, and he's like, it doesn't come off professional. He's like, well, I need your help, it's heavy. So you knew when he said this that this stove was gonna break. See, I like this scene better where you knew something like that was gonna happen compared to the Gatorade scene, because it just had a quicker pace to it because you knew something was coming, but I was a little more patient with it this time because it knew that this time. I felt that was much better handled here. I love the line too where he's outside and he's putting the stove on the ramp, and he's like, I can't do this alone. Can I get your help? And Asher says, come on, man, you're effing jacked. You can do this. And the stove falls, it breaks. The whole thing is a complete failure here. So that was a really funny scene. Now, let's go back to that scene with Dougie and Asher in the hotel, which is a very important scene. And the biggest reveal to me of this episode is that Dougie bullied Asher and Asher had blocked it out. This really sets up sympathy you feel for Asher here. That as crazy and cringy Asher is, you feel for him here in this moment. At least I did, about the bullying. And that is a good place they put it in this episode because it sets up a complicated feeling you'll have at the end of this episode in the big scene, which we're going to get to. And I really give props to Nathan Fielder in his reaction to this moment when Dougie is saying this and how Asher looked at it as them just joking around and not bullying. Very sad and a great reaction here. Also interesting how frustrated Dougie is that Whitney's morality is getting in the way of a good show. Dougie's talking about they have a great show in here and they're throwing it away, like the reporter and the girl cursing him. And what's meta about that is that that's the show we're watching. So I thought that was pretty cool how that was shown and written. And what was interesting is when Asher is filling in Dougie about the chicken penny debacle, it reminded me then, because the framing of that moment reminded me of the voyeuristic moment of episode 1 at the end, where someone was clearly watching Asher and Whitney at the end of the episodes from a different hotel room. So you can't forget that there is an entity involved here that is watching them, or maybe it's cursing them. something connected that we do not know. There's a party involved we don't know yet. Now, Whitney's getting a massage, and she's just at her boiling point, so it makes sense she get a massage here. And she also schedules a massage for somebody else that she thinks doesn't have insurance. So I want your theories on who that could be, and I also want your theories about this scene when she sees this spiritual practice in the neighborhood and she sees a sign, always take the high road. I'm curious what you guys and how you interpreted that scene in general, because I'm not sure how to interpret it myself. So I'd love to hear some engagement on that. Now I want to go to the last scene. Asher is in the corporate comedy class, and the teacher's like, make the whole group laugh without using any words. So this was brilliantly shot, and where they had placed Nathan in this scene and how they had the camera slowly coming to him, setting up his anticipation for his moment to go. And I had said in my review last week, a scene like this was set up already previously because he's been bombing everywhere. He bombed in the hospital room when he was doing the cry, cry, baby, wah, wah in front of the doctor and Whitney, and they didn't even react. So it's that same kind of humor he's doing here. And the way Nathan Fielder did his moment, I was dead. And what made it so complicated in the show, I think really stands out apart that I'll remember in a scene like this is it's also incredibly sad. And that was set up from the bullying and from moments of him bombing and how he just can't be funny, right? It's not happening for him there. It's really cringe. It's hysterical because it's Nathan Fielder and the way he does it. I was dying, but I also felt terrible for him at this moment. It was sad. So I'm giving props to that end scene, how powerful it was and how sad I felt, and laughing my butt off at the same time, which I don't think I've really experienced that level in a long time. So really interesting and different and fascinating. I actually really like this episode. I'm going to give this one a 9. It was my second favorite to the premiere so far. And it's because of how much layers were in here and how much it was making the character of Asher a little more sympathetic than he previously was, a little more complicated. So it's helping because Dougie's been, I feel like, the best written character so far, and that's adding now to making Asher a better written character, which I think we're getting that with Whitney now and her about to explode, and I like how they're setting this up. So I thought this was a really strongly written episode and really great directing too. I thought the direction here was spot on and only enhanced each scene. So I'm gonna give this one a 9. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. Please subscribe. It helps me in so many ways you have no idea, and I'll see you next time.